beginning of the broadcast, we've been experiencing some hot weather, and forecasters say that's likely to continue. Since we're at a time in the season that's critical for growing crops, the way the forecast shakes out is especially important for your bottom line. Nebraska Extension agricultural climatologist Al Dutcher joined me to explain what this weather market means.
Well, it's very simply, a weather market is simply the weather impacts during that critical pollination phase and the concern whether or not you're going to make your crop compared to what the projections were and what your carryout is, and trying to balance those things. So, this time of year, things can get really interesting, especially if you got some dryness issues around the United States.
And Al, over the past several weeks, much of Nebraska is experiencing above normal temperatures along with below normal rainfall. Break that down for us and explain what that means for crop conditions and pasture conditions in the coming weeks.
Well, I think the hardest hit is pastures, and certainly when you look at the 30-day temperature deviations across the country, you can see that most of the major warmth is exactly in the high plains region from North Dakota all the way southward. And in terms of precipitation, the last 60 days really shows where the pastures are hurting. Really dry in the western high plains region. Farther east you go, more concentrated areas of precipitation. So a little bit wetter east, much drier to the west.
With these above normal temperatures here in July, we're keeping an eye not only on corn pollination, but also heat stress in cattle, right?
Yeah, simply when you look at the CPC outlooks for July being hotter than normal, of course, that's always concerned about excessive heat because our normal highs are in the low 90s during much of July. So excessive heat puts you 10 degrees higher. Add in humidity, and then you start to get concerned with the cattle. Luckily, from a model standpoint, you see long, expansive periods of extreme heat and extreme relative humidities. Get a few days of it, backs off, get a few more days of it. Hopefully, that's the way it stays for the rest of the month, and we continue to get a chance of precipitation offset this dryness that has been fairly well established across much of our region for the better part of 60 days.
Take us through the Drought Monitor. What have we been seeing here?
What we have seen is an expansion slowly and progressively since this winter. The drought in the southern plains and the southern Rockies expanding toward the north has now reached Nebraska. We're seeing an expansion of dryness conditions in the southwest, northwest panhandle, and abnormally dry conditions starting to invade much of west central, and northeastern Nebraska, and probably into the southern panhandle. And I think the worst condition can be related to the 60-day precipitation and percent of normal. And that is the worst conditions, I think, for pastures of that area was 25 to 50% of normal, invading southwest, southern panhandle, and northwest. There's where I think the conditions are really going to deteriorate over the next 2 weeks, especially if we don't get the precipitation that's really well needed in that region.
Could you give us any good news with the weather over the next several weeks?
I can't give you much good news on the heat. I think the best of the heat is it will go return to near normal to slightly below normal on a day or two as a low passes to the north of us through the upper atmosphere. More importantly, what I see as a possibility is that because we have so much high humidity in the atmosphere and corn giving off a lot of moisture during the pollination period, we get a little energy moving through, we can get scattered convection. Where it falls will be very localized and heavy, get 2-3 inches, maybe even more. Those around it get lost out. Price to pay for that is Iceman cometh, and so does the wind. And at this time of the year, you always worry about green snap right coming into the pollination period. I think that's going to be our biggest issue is how many derecho events do we have over the next 2 weeks that move across the corn belt. It's those high wind events that can cause a lot of problems to the pollination period.